All right, welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of personal identity today. We'll do a bit of a review. There's sort of a lot going on, a lot to wrap your head around with regard to the dialectic. What points are being made against, or excuse me, what arguments are being made against which theories, how those arguments are to be responded to, and then problems with responses. All right, so first off, recall that we began when asking questions about personal identity with this really plausible answer. What makes you the same person over time has to do with facts about your psychology, that the you who's sitting here now is psychologically connected in the right kind of way to the person your mother brought into this world. Right? There's a continuous chain linking you now, to that much earlier self of yours, and it's in virtue of that continuous psychological link that you are the same person. It's not the fact that you have the same body, right? You don't have the same body. If personal identity required having the same body, then obviously we'd have a problem, because you are very much unlike the person who entered this world so long ago. All right. So, this is good news for the psychological account, because the psychological account can very easily accommodate this piece of information, that our bodies do gradually replace themselves. Right? This isn't obviously fiction, this is real. Right? Our bodies are continuously changing. But there's other more fictional considerations that we would want a theory of personal identity to explain. Not because, well, that's just what we want, right? Because it seems like we can very easily imagine situations in which we get different bodies, right? We can imagine there being, just as there are heart transplants, liver transplants, and so on, one day science might develop to the point where they can do just a full brain transplant. And we'd assume that in such a case, though you get a new body, you'd still be the same person, because presumably memories and all the other relevant facts about you go with your brain. But we can also imagine cases in which two persons occupy the same body. Right? But if, excuse me, actually, let me turn this off. We can imagine cases in which two persons occupy the same body. So it'd be like two persons in one car. You can imagine science developing to the point where you could just not put not just one brain in somebody else's body, but two brains in a body. And we'd think that you'd still be continuous and identical to one of the two persons in the body, even though you don't have the same body as you have now. But again, the psychological theory can do quite well in explaining how personal identity is preserved across such drastic changes. Right, but we saw that there are problems, right? Although there's these benefits to the psychological view, there are problems too. So fission cases. Recall what these are. In fission cases, Parfit asks us to consider your brain being split in half. Half your brain with, let's assume, half your memories, half your intentions, and so on, going into a new body. And the other half, with the other half of your memories and so forth, going into another body. The resulting two bodies would be continuous with you, right? They'd have your memories, half of them, your hopes, half of them, your intentions, again, let's assume half of them. So they'd be psychologically continuous, and by the psychological criteria, they'd be you. But wait, how could they be you? You're one person, right? Identity is a 1-1 relation. If A is identical to B, there's not two things, right? There's just one thing. So you can't be them, because that's a 1-many relation, right? That'd be a relationship between you and more than one individual. So fission cases pose problems. Same thing with teleportation cases. Remember, we consider teleportation working this way. Machine scans your body, right? creates a perfect duplicate somewhere else, right? Your brain is perfectly duplicated. So everything that's true of your actual brain and mental life gets transferred to the duplicate. You have apparent memories of being home and having cereal earlier that day. The duplicate also has the same apparent memories and the same genuine memories, it would seem, as well, by the psychological criteria, because the psychological criteria predicts that they're you, right? Because they're psychologically continuous with you. But we asked the question, who's really you? The individual who got scanned or the individual who was produced on the basis of the scan? And the thought, at least put to advocates of the psychological view, is this. It really seems like you're the individual who was scanned, and the thing that was created is a duplicate of you. It's not you. But if you're a fan of the psychological view of personal identity, you're committed to saying that the duplicate is in fact you, because they're psychologically continuous with you. Right? They have their mental life because you have yours. And their mental life is continuous with your mental life. They have the same memories and hopes and desires and so on. And their memories and hopes and desires are causally exist because yours did, right? Yours gave rise to theirs because your body was scanned, your brain was scanned, and yours was reproduced. Yours is partially causally responsible for theirs. So trouble with the psychological view. Trouble with the psychological view. So we get Parfit, who tells us, we just got to give up on identity. Identity's not where the action's at. Identity's not where the interesting questions lie. The interesting questions lie with this, survival. What matters is that we survive. And yeah, identity does entail survival, but we can survive without being identical. Right? So in fission cases, right, so suppose half your brain goes one way, the other half the other, you survive. There's no answer to the question, which person are you identical to, says Parfit. But there is this fact that you should take comfort in. You don't die. You don't cease to exist. Right? You continue on. And Parfit says this is what matters. All right. So here's where we're going to go today. We're going to look at another way of thinking about the evidence on behalf of the psychological view. Williams is going to give us a case which just seems to be another variation on the same kind of cases that make the psychological view plausible in the first place. Right? It's going to be a variation on brain swap cases. And then what he's going to do is very cleverly re-describe these cases in such a way that they seem to give us the opposite conclusion, and so seem to undermine, in a really powerful way, the data the psychological view was invoked to accommodate in the first place. Okay? So here's Williams' first case. He thinks, ordinarily, if you ask people if they can conceive of situations in which people swap bodies, it's not terribly difficult to imagine this happening. Just imagine they switch brains, right? So instead of an organ transplant, or an ordinary organ transplant of the sort we're familiar with, you just have a brain transplant, right? Your brain is pulled out of your skull and put into somebody else's, and their brain is pulled out of their skull and put into yours. Seems like, since memory and all of the relevant mental states go where the brain goes, you've now switched bodies. Right? Your personal identity has been preserved across this body swap or brain swap, however you like to think of it. Okay. But here's Williams' next point. We don't have to be quite so insistent on brain switching to accommodate this idea of body switching. We can imagine a scenario working in this kind of way. Suppose that science develops to the point where your brain can be scanned and all the facts about the structure of your brain are just recorded on some kind of backup drive. And so this is really great for brain surgeons because a lot of the trouble with brain surgery is that it causes damage to the brain and really can mess you up in the end. But if, they have this kind of backup device, right, we can suppose that it just restores the brain to its previous state. So a surgeon could go in, remove a tumor, and then restore your brain to its previous state. So you'd have all your same memories, your personality won't be changed, it won't be like a Phineas Gage situation. And so we can ask the question, suppose you go into surgery, damage is done, but your brain is restored by way of the backup drive, right? The backup drive gives instructions for a machine to replace your brain to its earlier, pre-traumatized state. Do you survive? Well, William's thought is that, yeah, right? If we had this kind of technology, right? If your brain could be rejuvenated on the basis of information taken by a machine as to the previous state of your brain, then yeah, you'd survive. You'd be the same person. You'd have the same memories. Right, so that's the assertion. And it's not an unintuitive one. Right? If any of us were looking at having, say, a significant tumor removed and knew that there'd be brain damage, but we had this option of having our brain restored to its previous state, we'd almost certainly elect to have our brain restored. And we'd think that we'd survive. Right? Personal identity would be preserved across this kind of event. Any questions about the case up to this point? Do you find it intuitive that you'd be the same person if your brain were rejuvenated in this kind of way? It's kind of like knocking down a tower of Legos and putting them back together into their original form. Right? It's the same structure, right? Even though everything was messed up for a moment, it was restored and you have the same structures you had before. Okay. Well, he says, look, if we can preserve personal identity in this way, well, we can also have body swaps in this way. Right? Imagine instead of carving out your brain and putting it into the person next to you and vice versa and switching bodies that way, well, we could switch bodies in this other way as well. We just have backups of both your brains, and then we have each brain restored to the backup of the other person. So it's not really restoration, but it's you're right, just a change. Right, so we have person A and person B, and then we have the rejuvenation process, right? The brain being refitted or reformatted to fit the mold of the other person. And then at the end of the day, the thought is the person who was in body A now occupies body B, because body B now has the brain, at least brain structure of the other person. And so it has all the same memories and hopes and desires and so on. And so the same goes for the person in body B. All right. More generally, the thought is this. If you're willing to allow this brain rejuvenation process to preserve memory and other relevant psychological states, that sure seems like it should be able to transfer them as well. So how are you guys with Williams up to this point? All right. I'll take silence as understanding. All right. Now consider the following case. Suppose that person A and person B are about to undergo a body swapping operation via this brain rejuvenation process. There's an announcement made. And it's an unfortunate announcement. It's announced that after the operation, one person will receive a lot of money. The other person will be tortured. Okay. Pardon me, not one person, but the body of one of the persons. All right. So you've got two bodies. They undergo this brain rejuvenation process, and then at the end of the day, one body will be tortured. The other gets money. Now, suppose you gave the two people who are about to undergo this brain rejuvenation process just to say, you ask them, oh, what would you like to happen? Who do you want to get the money, and who do you want to be tortured? Who do you want to get the money, and who do you want to be tortured? All right, so just take a second, consider yourself in this scenario. What would you say? Just share your thought with the person nearest to you. So let's see where you're at. If you were in this situation, say you were person A, would you elect the A body person to receive the money, or would you elect to have the A body the person who ends up with your body before the operation to be tortured? All right. So would you elect the A body person to receive money? All right. Would you elect the A body person to receive torture? All right, so you're electing to have your body tortured. All right, good. Most of you said that. This is William's prediction. He thinks that when you think about the scenario as described up to this point, this is going to be the dominant reaction, right? And you echo this thought. Right, now, this is obviously a problematic situation for the persons involved because both people can't get what they want, right? One person is going to be tortured. And whoever that person is, they're going to complain. They're going to say, this is not what I asked for, this is not what I wanted, and so on. All right, so this is a sad scenario for someone. And so he says the results seem to confirm yet further, right? So we're just piling on evidence for the psychological view, right? This is his point. The psychological view can explain all of your reaction, or virtually everyone's reaction in here, and what he thinks is the dominant reaction to this case. But he says, hold on a second. Let's think about the case in just a different kind of way. All right. Suppose you've been kidnapped by an evil genius neuroscientist. Okay? This is what he tells you. Right? And suppose he's right. He's not just saying these things, but he's got the power to pull them off. Okay? Right? He tells you this. Tomorrow, I will torture you. Right, and you have great reason to think that if he says this, right, he's evil, but he's not a liar, right? You're terrified, right? He's got the power to pull this off. He obviously has the intention to pull this off. Right, so you're scared. Suppose he tells you something else, right? He tells you, tomorrow I'll torture you, but you won't remember that I've informed you of this. All right, so the thought is, he tells you, but then you're going to forget sometime after he tells you. Now, so you know you're going to forget. Right? Again, he's not a liar. He's got the power to pull this off. Are you still scared? Right? While you remember that in the future you will be tortured, though you will forget knowing that you will be tortured. And, yeah, you still would be scared. Doesn't matter that you're going to forget you're going to be tortured. Right now you remember being told, and so I have great reason to think you will be tortured. You're going to be terrified. Suppose he tells you something else. I'm going to torture you tomorrow, but you will first have suffered amnesia. Okay? are you still scared? Well, Williams think the dominant answer is going to be yeah. You're still going to be fearful of the torture. Right? You're going to be just as fearful as before. In all these circumstances, it seems not just that you will be inclined to fear, but it's appropriate for you to fear. You should fear. All right. Let's suppose we'll keep going with this kind of case. Here's what the evil, powerful, non-lying, genius neuroscientist tells you. He says, tomorrow I'll torture you. First, your current memories will be erased. All right, so that's just like the amnesia case. And instead, you'll have a completely different set of false memories of your past. Right? Not really of your past, but you'll think, right, this is like a total recall scenario. Right? Memory wiped, you're given false memories. So you have all kinds of false beliefs about your past. You actually grew up in Kansas, but now you think you grew up in Minnesota. And you thought your parents were Bill and Sue, but really they're Jane and Bob. Right? So just completely fictional past in your head. Now you're told this. You have great reason to believe it's true. Are you still going to be scared of the torture? Right? Williams thinks, yeah, you're going to still fear being tortured. He goes on. Same as before. The evil, powerful, non-lying neuroscientist tells you, tomorrow I'm going to torture you, but first your current memories will all be erased. Instead, you'll have a completely different set of false apparent memories of your past. And those apparent memories will actually fit the past memories of another person now living. So the idea here is it's no longer a fully fictional scenario that's been concocted and put into your head, but now you're going to think you're someone else who actually exists. Right? So it's while being tortured, you're going to think I'm Tom Cruise or something, and you're going to have just a whole false set of memories that actually match Tom Cruise's life. Now, knowing that you're going to have all these false beliefs about yourself in the future, or at least someone will, because we don't want to presuppose personal identity, are you still going to fear being tortured? Right? Now you know that you're going to suffer amnesia, not just false memories, but false memories that match somebody else's actual life. Are you still going to be scared of what's to come? And William's thought is, yeah, you're going to be really scared of, right? None of this change. Torture is, right? It's still going to be something you're scared of. All right, same as before, but now we just massage the scenario a little bit. You're not just given memories that happen to match somebody else's life, like Tom Cruise or whatever. Rather, you inherit the memories of some other actual person. So in the previous scenario, your memories just happen to match somebody else's. Right? Some machine just sort of willy-nilly picks a set of memories that happen to fit somebody else's life. In this scenario, somebody else's brain is copied. Right? So think brain rejuvenation again. Right? That backup disk is taken, installed into the machine, and you get the download. Right? So your brain is now a match with theirs, and it's a match because of theirs. Right? Theirs has been copied, and now yours has a structure because of the copy. So there's a causal connection between that person's mental life and the brain you now have, and the apparent memories you now have. All right. Does that change what you're going to be fearful of? Right? Are you still going to fear torture? William says, yeah, and a lot of you are nodding your head. Right? None of this seems to impact the fear. So why is this a problem? Right, what's Williams doing here? Well, Williams has just concocted a scenario in which you're fearful, not for somebody else. Your thought is, I'm fearing a future event that will happen to me. right? You're fearing being tortured. You're not fearing somebody else is being tortured. You're fearing your torture. But wait a second. How could you be fearing your torture given all the disruption to your psychology? Right? If the psychological view of personal identity is true, then you don't exist after all this trauma to your psychological life. If you don't have any of the same memories, if you have all and only false memories, then by the lights of the psychological view, what? Do you exist? No, you don't, because the psychological view says you only continue to exist so long as you're psychologically continuous with earlier stages of yourself. But in this kind of scenario, continuity is obliterated, right? You suffer amnesia, you get all kinds of false memories put in. Williams says this indicates that our view of personal identity doesn't so neatly match what the psychological view says it should. Right? So he says, if this is right, the whole question seems now of personal identity seems now to be totally mysterious. For what we've just been through is, of course, merely one side, differently represented of the transaction we considered before. What he's referring to is the earlier body swap by way of brain rejuvenation. Right? Remember, we gave that initial case. And virtually all of you said, with regard to that initial case, that if persons A and persons B have their brains rejuvenated on the basis of, or have the brains in their bodies rejuvenated on the basis of the other person's brain scan, then you've had a body swap. So, person A now occupies person B's body. Person B now occupies person A's body, or their former body. But this is just a different way of thinking about the scenario. And you've had exactly the opposite intuition. You've thought about having your brain, your psychological life, so disrupted that it's completely discontinuous with your previous mental life, and it turns out to be continuous with somebody else's. So it seems like it's somebody else who's going to be tortured by the psychological criteria. But that's not what you thought. You thought, it's me who's going to be tortured. Right. So 2 lessons. The first and the second case are extremely similar, but they lead to opposite conclusions. And the second lesson Williams would have us draw is that given this fact, right, given the fact that we've got 2 cases that lead in opposite conclusions, we shouldn't take the earlier case to be some kind of compelling evidence for the psychological view. Right? When we started out with the earlier case, we thought, yeah, this was just another variation on a very familiar piece of evidence for the psychological view. Williams says, look, it's, I don't know if we should say easy, but right, he pulled it off. He described a case very much like the other ones that points in the exact opposite direction. And if we can so easily undermine the intuitive force of our earlier arguments, we shouldn't take our earlier arguments to be in any way decisive, right? We should be skeptical of the psychological view and the intuitions that surrounded the earlier case. All right, so why don't you take a second, register your thoughts with the person sitting near you. With the person sitting near you, see if they share Williams's thought about fear. Do you fear for your own torture, or do you think something else is going on? All right, so just register where you're at. All right. So, do you feel like anything's missing in his case, or do you find it persuasive? Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a difference between the two cases because in the first instance, it's kind of, man, I'm not sure if it's like a tough test. You've swapped and it's one person going into another person's body. But in the second case, it's just like it's a copy of someone else's memories and they're not necessarily like abandoning the body that that person was first from. So that kind of leads me to believe that the body swap, but the first case, they wouldn't do the same.
Okay, so you're feeling like what Williams' case is doing for us, it's not necessarily leaving, the second case isn't necessarily leaving anything out. The first case is. And the problem is with the first case that maybe we shouldn't have been so quick to assume that this brain rejuvenation process, even if it could preserve identity, could transfer identity. All right, yeah. That's definitely a thought Williams is wanting us to share. Any other reactions to Williams' case? Yeah.
It sort of hints that personal identity is also more connected to the body than you sort of originally think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though, you would assume that if someone else's memory were being placed in your brain, you'd sort of lose who you are at that moment. But you're still fearful of
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen. So it's not like your personal identity is completely disconnected from your body.
Right, right. Good, good. So this is definitely pushing us in the direction of an alternative view of personal identity that I'll articulate just a bit. Now, Williams at least anticipates this kind of reaction. Right? He makes a similarity claim, right? I've given you two cases. They're, for all practical purposes, just alike, right? We've just looked at one case, he says, in two different ways. Well, you can imagine someone saying, oh, wait a second, that's moving just a bit too fast. All right. The first case isn't actually like the second. Because in the first case, you have two obviously distinct individuals, and then through the same process, both have their brains rejuvenated on the basis of somebody else's backup. But we don't clearly have two people experiencing this kind of rejuvenation business in Williams' second case. In Williams' second case, you just have one individual whose brain is rejuvenated. So you have in Williams's second case, it's more like a fission case. The fission cases are puzzling, right? So maybe we shouldn't base our objection to the psychological view on a fission case. What we need is something less fission-like. So Williams says, fine, let's just massage my second case a bit, right? We can very easily deal with this. So suppose, you know, by way of the evil genius telling you so, that before your body's tortured, right, amnesia plus character change, right? So the character change business is to increase the psychological disconnect between your earlier self and your post-amnesia self. Fictional implanted memories. All right, so this is all like the case before. Again, like the case before, you have amnesia, character change, memories implanted that closely resemble somebody else. Implanted memories duplicated. All right, so this is, up to this point, we have it just like before. Williams says, all right, well, let's just add a bit more. Somebody else B, right, so you know this. You're going to be tortured. Evil person says so. But we're going to erase your memories. I'm going to change your character. And you're going to have memories implanted in your head by way of this brain rejuvenation process. Oh, and by the way, there's some other guy I'm going to torture later, and I'm going to give him your memories. Okay, so now we've got two people in the mix who are having their brains rejuvenated on the basis of each other's, backups. Right. So this is just like the first case William gave, right? The first case that we wanted to say was a real body swap case. Now Williams asks, does this change your level of fear? Or does knowing that there's some other guy who's going to be tortured, that's going to have your memories, does that... I wonder if I misremember it. Let's just say, yeah. So there's some other guy who's going to be tortured, but later on, right? So say it's in a week's time or something, right? Tomorrow you're going to be tortured, or I'm going to torture your body after bringing off all these changes. Are you still going to fear, even though you know that there's somebody else's body who's going to be tortured later? And Williams' thought is, no, you're still going to fear the torture of your body at the point at which your body's tortured. Right? You're still going to fear the torture of your body, even though this other thing's going to happen to someone else. So Williams' thought is that these facts about fear are pretty robust, and they're robust in the face of all kinds of psychological discontinuity. And here's the second point he makes. So you've got cases 1 through 6. He also wants to make a comparative point. All right, so suppose that you're of a mind to say that in case 6, no, you shouldn't fear the torture of your body. Right, suppose that you want to say, no, here everything changes. Fear is no longer appropriate. We'll look at the difference between 5 and 6. If fear is not appropriate in 6, there's not that much of a difference between 5 and 6. So if, right, the only difference between 5 and 6, I'm sorry I put it in this shadowed text. The only difference between 5 and 6 is that in 6, there's some other body that's going to be tortured. And that body that's going to be tortured has implanted memories. So if you shouldn't fear in 6, presumably you shouldn't fear in 5. But there's not that much of a difference between 4 and 5. So if you shouldn't fear in 5, you also shouldn't fear in 4. And you can see what he's doing. 3 and 4, again, there's not that much of a difference. How can it be inappropriate to fear in 4, but appropriate to fear in 3? It says, nah, if it's inappropriate to fear in 4, then it's also inappropriate to fear in 3. So he's just marching us back to 1. So if it's inappropriate to fear in 6, it's inappropriate to fear in 1. But that seems kind of crazy, or at least quite counterintuitive. I shouldn't say kind of crazy, just counterintuitive is his point. And by the same token, if it's appropriate to fear in 1, then it's got to be appropriate to fear in 2, right? Because there's not much of a difference between 1 and 2, right? And so we're going to march up the other direction. Okay. Before I turn to some other matters, any reactions to these final points of Williams?
So this case, the last case, they're told that they'll be tortured tomorrow, but someone else's memories will be put into them, or their memories will be put into someone else. Are they told that?
So the 6-bit is what you're asking about? Yeah. So the original objection that Williams wants to deflect is this. In his second case, he doesn't bring on another individual who has different memories, their memories. But that was a central part of the very first case given, where you have two individuals, A and B, who have their brains rejuvenated on the basis of each other's backups, and so seem to swap bodies in that way. So the thought is we need to bring in that element into the second case. Right? So that's what step 6 is supposed to do. It brings in that second element, that further element. It brings in another person whose brain is going to be rejuvenated on the basis of this person's memories. William still thinks that you're going to fear the torture of your body, even though someone else is going to have their memory reformatted with the copy made from your brain. And the fact that you're going to fear the torture of your body indicates that your personal identity isn't clearly traveling with what's psychologically continuous with you, but rather seems to be in some way tethered to your body. What I stumbled over earlier in my earlier descriptions, I can't recall. Right, there's a few ways Williams could have done this, and I for some reason I'm forgetting whether or not this other person who's rejuvenated is being tortured or not, and when that other person's being tortured or not. There are a lot of ways to go with those variables, but all that matters for Williams's point is this, and this is his point, that you still fear the torture of your body, however things go with the mind of, or the brains found in other bodies. And the fact that you fear the torture of your body suggests personal identity is somehow wrapped up in the body. All right. So a lot of this I've already said, right? There can be extreme disruptions to your psychology while fear remains appropriate. But on the psychological view, that's not the case. Fear would be inappropriate because you would no longer be the person being tortured or having anything happen to that particular body. All right. So the biological view. So here's an alternative view we haven't discussed. It was in the course text. So the biological view. To be the same person over time. So for A to be the same person as B is for A and B to both be persons. Right? To be the same person, you need persons. And for A and B to be the same human being, where human being is a term that tracks a specific biological organism and its changes. Right? So being the same human being is a matter of having the same body. Right? So two persons are the same person, just in case they're both persons and they share the same body. So some benefits, right? So there's obvious benefits to this view. Right? It can obviously explain Williams' data. Williams gave us a series of cases, all of which involved fear being appropriate, even though there was psychological discontinuity between you and the person being tortured. This view can explain that, right? It can explain why fear is appropriate, because it's the same human being that's being tortured. Right? Your body is the body that's going to be tortured. And it's going to be a person who's tortured, right? You will still exist through you. It's a person on the other end of the torture, right? Even though there's amnesia, even though there's character change, even though there's some false memories, you still have a person. So it's a person who has your body, and by the biological criteria, counts as the same person. So you will be the person being tortured, and so it's appropriate for you to fear. It's appropriate for you to fear. A further benefit of this view is that it can deal with teleportation cases. Right, so remember how that went? Here's a way of travel. Your body gets scanned. A duplicate is made. The original is destroyed. A very natural thought about this is that that's not a way of travel. That's a way of dying and having a copy made. The biological view can explain that thought, right? Because on the biological view, the body, the human being, ceases to be. right? No longer does that particular human being exist. It doesn't survive its own death. You just have a duplicate created, a twin, a copy on the other end. All right, but the biological view still has problems. So remember how we talked about brain fission cases, where your mind is continuous with two different persons? Right, so imagine your brain being cut in half, brain goes into two different bodies. All of a sudden, you're psychologically continuous with two individuals, but wait, you can't be two, because personal identity is an identity relation. There can only be one thing you're identical to, namely you. We can do fission with body, right? Imagine you could take a drug that would, all right, so this is kind of, right, think of Siamese twins in a way. All of a sudden, your body begins to replicate another body very organically. A hand begins to grow out your side, and a head begins to emerge. And all of this is just based, like your biology, it's copying cells, just like your cells get replicated in your own body. Now you're just getting a duplicate, right? So you're producing a twin, right? And it's going to share all your DNA. It's going to share, right, all your characteristics, your scars, your physical features, everything, right? So imagine, right, your body fissions slowly, slowly, and then all of a sudden it separates. Okay? No, we can't have complete separation, excuse me. Just say you're left in a Siamese-like state, joined at the hip, okay? How many persons are there? Right, you've just produced seemingly another one, right? Another head, another center of consciousness, another pair of arms, another pair of legs, but you're joined at the hip. Right? It's kind of an odd story. You're looking a little disgusted. The biological criteria says that you are both of them. Right? You're identical to your left half and you're identical to your right half, and that these are the same person. But wait, they can't be the same person, because identity is a one-one relation. You can't be identical to both. At most, you can be identical to one. So the biological view doesn't fully avoid the problems we discussed, right? There's fission cases with bodies. Fission cases with bodies. Another problem with the body view, or the biological view, is that it seems like we could slowly replace parts of our bodies over time with synthetic parts and still remain the same person. So just think of science developing to a point where we can get non-human material to graft neatly to the human body, and so preserve the human body and even preserve, right, what seems like the mind. So you get replacement arms, you get replacement legs, and then you get duplicate brain parts that function just like brain cells would function. They're just not brain cells, right? They're some kind of synthetic material. But they occupy exactly the same role. They do exactly what your brain cells do. And slowly over time, right, it's just a little piece replaced, and then eventually you're fully synthetic. Do you continue to exist? Well, one thought might be that this doesn't seem to be a case where you clearly cease to exist. If you're aging, and you know that in 5 years' time your brain's going to fully go, you'd think it a viable option to engage in this procedure because you'd think you could continue to exist this way. But this is not a thought that the biological view could make sense of. So there are troubles for the biological view. And what we're going to see next class is there is a way to perhaps have it all. What these problems are pushing us towards is this option, though. at this point, it seems like we're not having an answer to the question of personal identity that is fully satisfying. We haven't found an answer to the question that avoids all problems. And if there's no question to the answer that avoids all problems, you might feel pushed in the direction of giving up on the idea of personal identity. And this is a view that people have entertained, that strictly speaking, no, I don't. It's a fiction. There are biological organisms, there are minds, but there's no identity over time. Strictly speaking, it's always false to say, I had a past experience, because I am never the same person across times. But it's kind of useful to organize our lives that way and to think that way. And it's just a fiction. What Lewis is going to do for us is possibly provide us with an alternative to this no-self view. That's what we'll look at next time. Perhaps we have a way of solving all the problems that we've encountered so far. So that's the promise of Lewis.